Hi everyone. Today I want to continue on with my discussions of recent Criterion releases. Today I want to talk about Kier. This is a movie from 1997. It's directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. It first appeared in the US in 2001, which is when I think I first saw it, and I've seen it once since before my recent rewatch. And The Cure came out in the Criterion collection in late October, but on November 1st, it appeared on the Criterion channel with all the supplements that are on the physical release. And believe me, these supplements are fantastic. So if you like this film and you don't have access to the channel or you want to have it in your collection anyways, I highly recommend this one because this is not one of the Criterion releases where the supplements are meager. It's a story of a serial killer, at least an unusual one because the murders that have the same MO are being done by different murderers, and it completely unexplained, no motivation, loved ones, co-workers, strangers. And the killers have no recollection of what they have done. They seem to be in a trance. So we have the first half of the film is very much a police procedural. Detective called Takabe. He has a sidekick who is a psychiatrist because obviously this is a mystery that has to be solved involving the mental state, the mental impairment of the murderers. So the whodunit quickly becomes a why done it, how done it, and they do, early on, they do capture somebody who might appear to be, first he's sort of a witness, and then he is sort of the chief suspect in the murder, even though he did not commit the murders himself. So the movie, besides being a police procedural, is a bit of a horror film in that we see some grisly dead bodies, and the MO of all the murders involves an X being carved into the chests of the victims. So we go into kind of an occult film, a film about mesmerism, the history of mesmerism. And the second half, the first half is fairly genre police procedural. The second half becomes far more subjective in that are we seeing, or what we are seeing actually happening? Is it happening in the minds of the characters? Are we, the audience, being hypnotized? The film is really elevated by two towering performances. Koji Yakusho plays the detective. This is a very complex role because he himself, in his married life, his wife has had mental problems, and he himself, when he meets with his wife's psychiatrist looks at him and says, "I think you may be sicker than your wife." The stress of caring for her, the stresses of the job, and Yakusho would appear in many more. This is the first film he made with Kurosawa. He would appear in many more, including Pulse and Doppelganger, The Third Murder. Masato Hagiwara plays the chief suspect in a character called Mamaya, and he is just absolutely. He is in fact mesmerizing himself. Hypnotic performance. It's a very strange and very memorable. I don't think you're ever going to forget Masato Hagiwara's performance in Cure. When the film first came out in '97, Kurosawa, who is in a couple of different supplements, interviews with him, a more recent one and one from a few years after Cure was released. And he states that originally audiences were very perplexed by the film. It was, they were intrigued by it. They were stylistically, Kurosawa was always stylistically hypnotic. But what was it about? What was the film about? And because there's many, you can make different readings of the second half of the film. But what he says he was going for in these days, in Kurosawa's directorial biography he was making, I think they called it V cinema, I guess for violence. He was making very cheap direct-to-video movies that were gangster movies, Yakuza movies. This was the first one where he had a pretty good budget, because he left that production company, I think it folded up, who were making all these V movies, and he went to Dai, who was a much level up from the low budget movies that he'd been making. They loved the script to this film, but he talks in this interview about this particular period of his directorial life where he was just sort of doing whatever he wanted to do. He just took all kinds of risks. He didn't think about it so much. He was kind of riffing. And he says that he admired, and this is from his most recent interview, he so admired the films of, Hollywood films of the early 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, what he terms the pre-Spielberg era in Hollywood, where so many idiosyncratic movies were being made because the studios didn't know what kind of movies to make. And he uses the term confusion plus sophistication. So in other words, these American films were being made in a time when Americans were greatly confused, so they were reflecting the times. But they also had an element of sophistication. There were some great directors starting out, and some of the from the more classic period from the 1950s. He specifically mentions Robert Aldrich and Don Siegel, continuing to make genre films, but with a great difference in ambition and tone than what they were making in the 1950s. So he was going for this kind of stylistic. This stylistic approach of being not spelling everything out for us, this kind of confusion, but also the sophistication that he knew how films worked. You know, he had made a lot of films. He had made, before he was making these V movies, he had made some other films before that. So he knew what he was doing. He said, even if I didn't have a real specific idea of what it all means, he said, I did understand film through and through. That was where his interest was creating a film and creating this idea, and what he was really so good at, it was creating this feeling of dread, and not explaining everything to the audience. Now, and he specifically says the pre-Spielberg era, because Spielberg, you know, these early 70s movies, they got critical acclaim. They have enduring interest to them, but they didn't make money for the studio. Spielberg showed how you can make money. It showed the studios, this is how you can make money, and he wasn't alone. George Lucas in there. You don't confuse the audience. you play to what they want, and they'll come back and see it again with and that's not knocking Spielberg, but I mean, he found the design of spelling things out, leading you by the hand, which was totally different than the films of the American films of the early 1970s that Kurosawa was so admired. So the towering performances here by Koji Yakusho, who plays Takabe the detective. He would play in Paul's Doppelganger, Third Murder, and with this generational connection with Kurosawa. A very complex role. And Masato Hagiwara, who plays Mamaya, the chief suspect, and just amazing performances. The scenes together are fantastic. Long takes. Kurosawa let the actors do pretty much what they wanted to do. In these long takes, you move here, then you move here, then you move here. Very little direction of exactly how they should play the role. So you get an element that they're giving a lot of themselves. Now, with Hagiwara, who plays Mamaya, he didn't want to play the role. He thought that this role was just too difficult. He couldn't do this role. It was not part of his acting toolbox. And Kurosawa convinced him. He said, just come to the set, be yourself, wear your own clothes, you know, and sort of be a blank, and which is what Aguirre said he did, and something worked, something clicked in the whole process, that he couldn't, he found himself unable to escape Mamiya, the character that he's playing, and he didn't want to see the premiere. But then Yakusho called him up and said, "No, you're great in this film. The audience loved it." And he was like so relieved. He said, "Really? They loved what I did?" He said, "I never could really fully shake that character." And I think for an audience, you're always going to remember Mamiya in this film. It's just a tremendous film. Now, there's 2 recent interviews with both of them in the supplements, and Yakusho said that this is his career-defining role. This is his magnum opus. This is what made me the actor that I was going forward. And Hagiwara said, as I mentioned, he found it so difficult to escape the character, and Kurosawa had difficulty too, because he said, in the interviews, he says, I wanted to work with him again, but he was so memorable, I couldn't shake the idea of the actor as the character that he played. So he never did work with Hagiwara again. We get an interview with Kurosawa from about 25 years or 20 years ago, much closer to the production. But it's the interview that Ryusuke Hamaguchi, who directed Drive My Car, was a student of Kurosawa. He interviews Kurosawa, I think it's from this year or maybe last year, talking about Cure, and Kurosawa looking back at this early part of his career, the part that most of his fans preferred to his later films, his more recent films that I love. Wife versus Spy, it's such an overlooked film. I think that's his last film, at least that's been released in the U.S. But you can see he was a student of Kurosawa. Kurosawa also taught film, and you could see his Kurosawa as a teacher. You could see that. I mean, he talks with such clarity. He's amused by the interpretations of his movies, especially the early movies that are so open-ended. And you know, why did you do this way? And he says, I don't know. He says, I was working on instinct. I was able to just do whatever I wanted to do. He said, nowadays he would not have the courage to do that anymore. He said, my later films are more thought out. But he said, I would love to be able to do it. He said it would probably be a big flop, but it might be like Cure. It might be a film that in the future is going to look very, very interesting. We get an essay. I also want to talk, there's a very creative visual essay. It's by Alexander Philippe. And he very unusual for Criterion to present an essay like this, but he relates the sense of dread, the mood of the film, to other films. And I would have to say that from the standpoint of dread, of a sense of dread, if you like that kind of film, Cure is one of the great masterpieces of that sense of dread. I mean, it really is. Because you expect, people have been hypnotized and you expect them to kill, but they haven't killed yet. And you wonder, when is it going to come? There's an essay by Chris Fujiwara, one of the preeminent film historians of our time. I've read books by him. You can access that essay online if you don't buy the physical release and watch it watch it on the channel. I read some reviews, contemporaneous and recent reviews of Cure, which was originally called The Missionary. So there is an element of the film that's about healing, about being cured, and that's the great mysterious. One of the mysterious elements of the film. What does it mean to be cured? How is this main character being healed here? And they also, some of the reviewers have tied the mood and this dread and this confusion that inhabits Cure to the famous cult, Japanese cult of the 1990s. I think it's called Aram Shinriko. They were responsible for the famous subway gassing deaths and other killings as well. A cult that went back to the past, that was bringing, as in Cure, where sort of occult practices of the past come into the present. But that is not mentioned in any of the supplements. I was really surprised that it was not, because it certainly adds to that feeling of Cure might just as the confusing times in American society in the late 60s, early 70s contributed to the tone, the mood of American films of that era, that this could also tie into Cure. So, and especially in the sense of confusion, the sense of dread. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.